Hi everyone, Angela here. This is how I join binding strips on the bias with vertical stripes. Place the right strip perpendicular to the other at a 90-degree angle with right sides together. You need to sew a seam from this corner to this corner. Take the top strip and fold down the top edge to match with the side, creating a 45-degree angle, and carefully press. That center crease is the stitch line for the bias seam. Fold it back down and you can see that the stripes do not line up. Slide this top piece over to the left until the stripes match and the top and bottom corners still line up with the edges. Next, I'll use a glue stick, but I'm not going to run it across the fabric because I don't want anything to move, so I'll just gently dab it along the fold. I'm using purple glue so you can see, but this glue dries clear. Make sure the stripes are still lined up, carefully fold over the fabric, and press along the crease. You can double check that the stripes match by lifting up the binding and checking the sides without the glue. If it's easier for you to see, mark a line exactly along the crease. I'm using the Juki TL 2010Q sewing machine. The link for this and the tools I use are down in the description below. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, click the link for Echidna Sewing and Juki Junkies for North America. Stitch right on top of that mark, backstitching at each end. Pull apart the corners to separate the fabric where it's been glued. Then trim down the seam to 1/4 inch and the bits at the sides. Because I don't want any glue on my iron, I'm going to press the seam open flat with one of the scrap pieces on top. Now you have a really nice joined bias seam with the stripes matched up. Now when I'm joining the ends to finish, I'm not going to do it on the bias. You can do it, but it's very fiddly. And depending on the stripe, it just may not line up nicely. So this is when sewing a straight seam is perfectly fine. Here's the center point. Start with the binding slightly past it. I don't want the seam to be in the middle of a stripe. I want it between the colors. Mark where the seam will be and fold it under. Fold under the other end of the strip where the seam needs to be so that the pattern stays consistent. With this stripe pattern, there's a small gap in between, which is exactly what you want. This will remove any slack. Mark where the seam will be, open up the binding, fold under, and press across. Then repeat with the other side. If you're finding this video helpful, make sure to like, share, subscribe, turn on all notifications, and leave a comment below. As always, I'd love to know where in the world you're watching from. You can also show your support by becoming a member. Check that the pattern is correct, then hold the ends together from underneath and flip over with the wrong side up. Then carefully match your seams together. Now you can glue along the seam as before, but because it's a straight seam, I'll just use a couple of pins. Check the seam again and stitch along the crease. Remove the pins, check the seam, then trim the seam allowance down to 1/4 inch. Press the seam open and in half again. The binding should look slightly shorter than the fabric, but it'll sew up nice and flat. You generally don't want to join the binding with a straight seam because all the bulk ends up in one spot. You have 4 layers along the seam, and when you fold the binding over, the bulk doubles and can create a small bump. It's not so noticeable with the fabric I'm using, but definitely will be if you use a heavier fabric. To reduce the bulk, trim away just a tiny amount from the fabric and batting where the seam allowance is. Fold over the binding and adjust it so that the edge is nice and straight, and stitch to finish. Make sure to check out my full tutorial on how to make a quilted placemat with binding. Thanks again for watching, take care, and happy sewing!